Mark Carney's visit to Armenia was not a casual photo opportunity. Every step he took had intention, a precise pitch, a well-defined framework, and a carefully chosen set of partners he aimed to secure before leaving. In a single afternoon, he presented this strategy to the Prime Minister of Italy, the Prime Minister of Spain, and the President of Ukraine. Observing these readouts in sequence rather than in isolation reveals the clearest insight yet into the role Canada is carving out within Europe's security and economic networks today. The first engagement occurred with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. The official note emphasized that both leaders recognized advancements on commitments outlined at the G7 summit held in Kananasis, Alberta. That brief statement carries far more significance than it might seem. Kananasis had been Carney's summit, hosted on Canadian soil less than a year prior. The bilateral foundation he laid with Italy there continues to produce tangible results in a completely different context and at a separate multilateral forum months later. This is the true power of hosting a G7. It is not the iconic photographs of leaders against scenic backdrops, but the institutional momentum those meetings generate, allowing every subsequent interaction between the same leaders to resume where the previous left off. Carney is now leveraging the institutional capital he built in Alberta. The Italian meeting centered on 4 strategic sectors: critical minerals, energy, digital technologies, and secure supply chains. Each domain corresponds to an inherent vulnerability for Italy and a structural strength for Canada. Italy relies heavily on imports for energy, lacks a domestic critical minerals industry, and depends on digital infrastructure dominated by United States-based platforms and hyperscalers. Its northern industrial corridors have become increasingly exposed geopolitically over the past 5 years. Canada, on the other hand, produces uranium, nickel, copper, cobalt, and rare earth elements at scale, and has recently approved one of the largest liquefied natural gas export projects in the Western Hemisphere. Additionally, Canada possesses the land, climate, and hydroelectric capacity necessary to support sovereign data infrastructure for any government seeking alternatives to US-headquartered cloud providers. Viewed through this lens, the Italy readout is far more than a diplomatic courtesy. It reads as a market entry dossier. The statement that demands particular attention mentions the Defense Security and Resilience Bank. Carney explained to Meloni that this newly established multilateral institution would marshal private capital to expand defense industries across the alliance at the pace demanded by current security conditions. The bank's development team has targeted mobilizing approximately $135 billion United States dollars in defense financing capacity. Its charter had been finalized in Montreal less than 1 week prior to the Armenia trip, and Canada had been unanimously selected to host its headquarters. Keep that fact in mind, because this same institution resurfaces in the very next meeting with a different prime minister in the same venue on the same afternoon. Almost concurrently, the Spain readout became public. Carney convened with Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. Back in December, the two governments had already pledged to double the trade flow between Canada and Spain, an ambitious target by itself. Yet, in Yerevan, their conversation went far beyond mere trade volume. The discussions spanned defense industry collaboration, energy projects, infrastructure development, artificial intelligence, and digital sovereignty. Much like the session with Italy, the Defense Security and Resilience Bank featured prominently. Carney made it clear to Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez that the bank could fundamentally transform defense-related small and medium-sized enterprises while reinforcing the industrial capabilities of allied nations. Every word was carefully chosen. The bank is not meant to write massive checks to the handful of established defense giants dominating Western procurement. Its purpose is to invest in the next wave of mid-sized manufacturers across the alliance, a structural reshaping of NATO's industrial base, with Canada authoring the founding charter. The Spain meeting added yet another layer of strategic significance. According to the readout, both leaders acknowledged the considerable potential to deepen defense industry collaboration via Canada's involvement in the European Union's Security Action for Europe instrument, publicly known by its acronym SAFE. SAFE functions as the EU's dedicated borrowing mechanism, capable of channeling up to 50 billion euros into European defense procurement. Under normal circumstances, only EU member states can access these funds directly. Canada, which has never been an EU member, gained special access last December through a bilateral agreement allowing Canadian defense firms to bid for contracts funded by SAFE loans. By the time Carney met Sanchez in Armenia, that access was already legally secured. What they achieved together was to shift it from theory into operational reality. Spain is among 18 EU member states that have formally requested allocations under SAFE. Now, it is publicly signaling its intent to source a portion of its defense procurement from Canadian companies. Pause to consider the implications. Canadian defense manufacturers can now compete for contracts financed by EU, borrowing on terms nearly equal to those of firms headquartered within the bloc. Canada becomes the first non-European NATO ally to enjoy this level of structural entry. Sanchez confirmed in Yerevan that when Spain places safe-funded orders, Canadian industry will have a guaranteed seat at the table. This underscores both Europe's urgent desire to embed Canada into its rearmament framework and the precision with which Carney has positioned Canada as an indispensable allied partner. The final meeting that afternoon was with President Vladimir Zelensky, where Carney delivered immediate concrete support. Canada pledged an additional contribution of approximately 270 million Canadian dollars, equivalent to around 200 million United States dollars, directed toward critical military capabilities identified on NATO's prioritized Ukraine requirements list, commonly abbreviated as PRL. PRL is a NATO-administered procurement system enabling contributing nations to allocate funding for equipment sourced from U.S. stockpiles and delivered directly to Ukrainian forces. The phrasing here is crucial. PRL is designed so that allied governments, including Canada and European nations, provide the financial commitment, while U.S. defense manufacturers fulfill the production orders. This is not a bilateral cash transfer to Kiev. It is a coordinated mechanism ensuring that resources are strategically applied to NATO-prioritized capabilities in real time. The Canadian funds flow directly onto American defense factory floors, producing equipment that is then sent to Ukrainian commanders, who have explicitly identified each item as critical under their submitted priority list. That choice of channel itself constitutes a strategic statement. Carney could have opted to announce 270 million Canadian dollars in direct bilateral aid to Ukraine, earning favorable headlines just as easily. Instead, he deliberately routed it through PRL. This decision achieves 4 objectives simultaneously. First, it integrates Canadian expenditure with allied purchasing power, multiplying the tangible impact of each dollar. Second, it signals to Washington that Canada is fulfilling its NATO responsibilities in a way that is both visible and verifiable, crucial at a moment when American political backing for Ukraine has grown more uncertain. Third, Canadian appropriations are funneled into American manufacturing orders, giving the current U.S. administration a direct economic incentive to maintain the flow of allied PRL contributions. Fourth, it embeds Canadian aid within a multilateral framework far more durable and difficult to reverse than a simple bilateral budget allocation. This marks the 3rd PRL contribution personally authorized by Carney since assuming office, following an initial pledge of 680 million Canadian dollars in August and a second commitment of 200 million Canadian dollars in December. Canada's cumulative PRL contributions now total roughly 1.6 billion Canadian dollars. Each dollar in this total has been deliberately structured to maximize leverage rather than merely register as an aggregate figure. The readout from the meeting with President Vladimir Zelensky also highlights discussions on increasing pressure on Russia to engage in genuine ceasefire and negotiation processes. Carney reaffirmed Canada's commitment to supporting Ukraine through the Reconstruction phase, noting ongoing progress in governance reforms. That reference to Reconstruction is analytically significant. Post-conflict rebuilding is precisely the arena where Canadian engineering firms, financial institutions, and agricultural exporters possess distinct competitive advantages. Carney is not simply ensuring Ukraine survives the current phase of conflict, he is positioning Canadian industry to play a foundational role in whatever comes next. When considered together, the 3 Yerevan meetings reveal the full pattern. In a single afternoon, Carney formally pitched the Defense Security and Resilience Bank to Italy and Spain, securing Spain's explicit public endorsement of Canadian access to the EU's primary defense financing instrument. He committed Canada to NATO's current mechanism for sustaining Ukrainian military capabilities. All of this occurred on the margins of a summit where Canada attended as the first non-European head of government ever invited to this format. The 3 instruments engaged during these meetings are not interchangeable. Each functions at a distinct layer of the same architecture. The Defense Security and Resilience Bank represents the financing layer, mobilizing and directing private capital toward industrial production. SAFE serves as the procurement layer, channeling EU borrowing directly into defense manufacturing and acquisition. PRL functions as the delivery layer, moving equipment from factory floor to frontline deployment. Each exists independently, yet Carney acts as the connector, with Canada positioned at the operational intersection of all 3 simultaneously. This is what it looks like when a mid-sized power ceases waiting for permission from a larger ally, and instead constructs a pivotal, load-bearing role within a new alliance framework. 3 readouts, 3 separate rooms, 1 coherent strategy unfolding in real time. Canada is not just participating, it is orchestrating influence and operational leverage on the European and NATO stage. The lesson is clear. Deliberate strategy, sequential execution, and multilateral integration multiply impact far beyond the sum of headline-grabbing announcements. Canada's approach in Yerevan demonstrates how smart, coordinated, and patient diplomacy can translate national capability into decisive allied influence.